In an unusual move, President-elect Donald Trump has asked the Supreme Court to call off Friday's sentencing in his hush money case in New York. Trump's lawyers turned to the nation's highest court after New York courts refused to postpone the sentencing by Judge Juan M. Merchan, who presided over Trump's trial and conviction last May on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. Trump has denied wrongdoing. Trump's team sought an immediate stay of the scheduled sentencing, saying it would wrongly restrict him as he prepares to take office, while Merchan has indicated he will not impose jail time, fines or probation. Trump's lawyers argued a felony conviction would still have intolerable side effects. And the Justice Department has said it will release Special Counsel Jack Smith's findings on Donald Trump's efforts to undo the results of the 2020 presidential election, but will keep under wraps for now. The rest of the report focused on the president-elect's hoarding of classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago estate. This was revealed in a filing to a federal appeals court that was considering a request by Trump lawyers to block the release of the two-volume report while charges remain pending against two Trump co-defendants in the Florida case accusing the president-elect of illegally holding classified documents. And U.S. President-elect Donald Trump escalated his expansionist rhetoric, saying he wouldn't rule out using military coercion to take control of Greenland or the Panama Canal. Trump has issued threats against several U.S. partners. On Tuesday, he floated using economic force to annex Canada, though officials in those nations have staunchly pushed back. He also proposed renaming the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. Responding to Trump's recent comments, France warned the president-elect against threatening the sovereign borders of the European Union. Meanwhile, Trump's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr., he flew to Greenland on what he called a private trip. Pause this report to understand Trump's expansionist plans and how it could rock the world.
This is not the new map of the United States. This is another instance of Donald Trump hinting that Canada could be taken into U.S. territory. Sending shockwaves across the globe, the map shows the whole of Canada as part of the U.S. The U.S.-Canada boundary is the world's longest between two countries. It was established in treaties dating back to the founding of the U.S. in the late 1700s. Trump claimed the U.S. spends billions of dollars protecting Canada, while criticizing imports of Canadian cars, lumber, and dairy products.
You said you were considering military force to acquire Panama and Greenland. Are you also considering military force to annex and acquire Canada?
No, economic force. Because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like, and it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada.
Canadian leaders have so far showed a united front against Trump's rhetoric, with outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau saying there's no chance Canada would become part of the US. Opposition leader Pierre Poilievre took to X, saying that Canada will never be the 51st US state.
You know something, to the president, I'll make him a counteroffer. How about if we buy Alaska and we'll throw in Minnesota and Minneapolis at the same time?
The rhetoric in the Trump camp doesn't stop with US President-elect. One of his closest advisors, Elon Musk, has trained his sights on Europe, setting off alarm bells across the continent. He's endorsed the far-right party Alternative for Germany, demanded the release of jailed UK anti-Islam extremist Tommy Robinson, and called UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer an evil tyrant. Musk's online behavior has become a cause of concern for many, from politicians to analysts.
He's clearly started to use that platform a bit like, an old-style newspaper mogul would in days of old, increasingly started to assemble a group of different right-wing influencers, many of them with large followings, and presenting their evidence as a basis for his interventions into European politics, whether it's Germany.
These recent statements from the Trump team have ruffled many feathers and created a lot of anxiety. Trump seems to also have his eyes on Greenland and the Panama Canal. All eyes now on the 78-year-old to what steps he would take to fulfill his extraordinary promises. With Vishal Vivek, Bureau Report, NDTV.
Well, what does Trump's expansionist rhetoric mean in the larger context, and what effects it might have? We'll try and understand that. In fact, I'm currently joined by my guest at this point, Spencer Crickley, political analyst, is also the author of Patriots of Two Nations. I also have Terry Miliuski, senior journalist from Canada, and I'm also joined by Harsh V. Pant, Vice President of the ORF. Gentlemen, welcome to NDTV. My first question to you, Mr. Spencer Crickley, how will Trump's expansionist rhetoric impact U.S. relationships with its allies and partners?
I think it's enormously damaging. He doesn't need to act on any of these comments. Just making these comments is shocking. International leaders and citizens of other countries should be deeply concerned. No leader of a country who respects the rule of law, who respects international treaties, could possibly be excused for saying this kind of thing. And for an American president to say this, it's the worst of all. Obviously, because the United States is the most powerful country in the world. So anytime the United States makes threats, it's potentially extremely damaging just in the act of making the threat. Because of the understandable fear and reactions it could provoke around the world. And it's extremely damaging to trust in the United States, which ultimately is based on American values, not on American power. American power is potentially a liability because it makes people so nervous. And the only reason that America has so many allies around the world, which I would say is the true source of its strength, is because people feel they can trust the United States to use that enormous power responsibly. And Mr. Trump is doing the exact opposite of that.
Right. Mr. Miliuski, I just want to understand, what is the general sentiment in Canada with respect to Donald Trump's comments before we ask any other question to you?
Well, it's very trivial support. There are millions of Canadians and Americans who live in the other country. We're already substantively, integrated in a dozen different ways at the very least. But at the moment, the polling results on this question, there's only been a few polls, hasn't been a lot of time. These are fragmentary snapshots, really. I've seen one with 11%, one with 13%. The highest number I've seen is 15% of Canadians. Any of these quickie polls say that they're even interested in exploring the possibility of joining with the United States. It's traditional in Canada to regard the United States as sort of the barbarian next door, or alternatively as the elephant sleeping next to the mouse. That's us. And that means if the elephant sneezes, we catch a cold. And in this case, of course, that's what's on offer. If we don't like the tariffs, well, look what's coming next. One cautionary note, though, which suggests that Mr. Trump may be going soft in his old age, and that is that he did not endorse the use of force in Canada's case. He's apparently prepared to bomb Panama into submission and invade a fellow NATO ally's territory in Greenland. But when asked directly if he was going to use force in Canada, he said no economic force. Well, he exaggerates wildly the economic force that he has at his disposal. He said, well, we're subsidizing Canada to the tune of $200 billion a year.
True.
Like much he says. I can give you the figures if you like, but suffice to say that it's absolute rubbish, and that the United States depends on a number of imports from Canada, such as 4 million barrels of oil a day. Daily figure, 4 million barrels of oil a day. What do you think is going to happen when Canada retaliates against these tariffs that Trump is contemplating, and the price of gas goes up across the United States? What about all of the other retaliatory tariffs that Canada did use successfully last time during Trump's first administration? It worked last time. I think that it will successfully work this time. The rest of it's about making Canada the 51st state. It's a joke. It's foolish. I agree that it is grossly irresponsible for any American leader, but then what did you expect? Donald Trump.
In fact, Mr. Harshvi Pant, Trump's suggestion of using military force to take control of Greenland or the Panama Canal, does it raise serious questions about his understanding of the international law and diplomacy? Some might say no, some might agree. What is your assessment?
See, I think here Mr. Trump is just being Mr. Trump. I think to expect anything serious in that context is very difficult. But one must admit that, look, he has learned from his first term. If you recall, if you go back to his first term, he was making a lot of the maximalist positions that he was taking, and people were not believing that he would, for example, take on China the way he was saying he would. And then he did. And then everyone had to adjust. Now, I'm not saying that this is likely to happen in these cases, but I think one has to look at these diatribes also as opening salvos in a long-term, readjustment, perhaps, that Mr. Trump wants to have. For example, with Panama, he may want to lower the fee that is being charged, particularly from the Americans. In the case of Greenland, he may want a greater footprint of America in Greenland because of what is happening in the Arctic and because of what Russians and the Chinese are doing there. In the case of Canada, this may be an opening intervention in a long-drawn engagement on trade and tariffs, for example. So he's putting all those eggs in a basket, and he's trying to create a sense that, look, his unpredictability is something that his friends and his adversaries both will have to take into account. Now, how individually all of these issues pan out, that would be interesting to see. But I don't think, in some ways, we should brush it off as simply bombastic, statements by Mr. Trump, because we have seen from his first term that he's quite capable of shifting the goalposts on a number of discussions. And particularly, I would point out about China, that everyone had to readjust their China policy after that. So I think there is something going on here. How this ends up remains to be seen.
Right, Mr. Trickley, the United States and Canada, these two countries, they have a massive trade relationship as well. Something on the lines of over 2.7 billion in goods and services crossing the border every day. Is there a fear that these comments might affect this relationship as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these comments, it's hard to overstate how deeply irresponsible and dangerous I think these comments are. Starting with just morally, they're wrong because they come from a position of the assertion of violence and force over the rule of law on which our modern civilization depends. Compared to that, the economic damage, I would say, is less important, but only because the political and moral damage is so enormous. And the economic damage would also be huge. And once again, the strength of that relationship is based on trust. It's incredible that we have to even discuss this kind of thing at this late date in history. Business thrives on the ability of people to trust contracts. And if contracts can just be torn up and thrown away, if international treaties, a form of contract, can be torn up and thrown away, and if the more powerful partner can just decide, we're going to do it this way now, business cannot function that way. And we go back to the pre-modern world, essentially of rule by warlords. This is just an incredibly irresponsible, immoral, and stupid position to take. It's stupid even from the point of view of the self-interest of the United States, which I think is the only thing, well, actually, I think the self-interest of Donald Trump is the only thing he's capable of thinking about. But even from the pure point of view of the self-interest of a suddenly amoral or immoral United States, it's stupid.
Right. Gentlemen, we're running short of time. Thank you very much for giving us your views. How will Trump's nationalist agenda affect global stability and security? Well, that is something that we'll have to wait and watch. In the meanwhile, other big story that we have been tracking is U.S. President-elect Donald Trump, in fact, on Tuesday warned that all hell will break out if Hamas did not release hostages before January 20th, when he will be sworn in as the 47th President of the United States. He was responding to a question on the status of negotiations with Hamas on the release of American hostages by them. His special envoy to the Middle East, Stephen Charles Witkoff, who has just returned from the region, told reporters that they are on the verge of it. In fact, let's listen in to what Donald Trump had to say.
Those hostages aren't back. I don't want to hurt your negotiation. If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East. Can you elaborate? And it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone. All hell will break out. I don't have to say anymore, but that's what it is. And they should have given them back a long time. They should have never taken them. There should have never been the attack of October 7th. People forget that.
All right, Meta Chief Executive Officer Mark Zuckerberg on Tuesday announced changes to content moderation on Facebook and Instagram, long sought by MAGA supporters in the United States. President-elect Donald Trump said that the new approach was probably due to the threats he made against the technology mogul, the move to replace third-party fact-checking with user-written community notes, similar to those on Trump backer Elon Musk's social platform X. Is the latest example of the media company moving to accommodate the incoming administration. In fact, the big tech's relationship with Trump is and has been complex, and their support isn't always straightforward. But while some tech companies they have criticized for their handling of misinformation and hate speech, others have taken steps to address these issues. But what do these recent developments mean in the larger context? I still have with me Mr. Spencer Crickley, political analyst and the author of Patriots of Two Nations. I also am joined by Xenia Bell, tech expert, the adjunct faculty of Cleveland State University. Spencer Crickley, this recent development, does it raise concerns that these changes may lead to an increase of misinformation and harassment on the platforms?
Yes, this is deeply, deeply concerning, and it's part of the, unfortunately, all too predictable pattern of assaults on the pillars of democracy that Donald Trump is conducting now and has been conducting since he entered national politics. And of course, one of the pillars of democracy is an independent media. And it's deeply disturbing and deeply disappointing to see the speed and almost eagerness with which major media companies, including social media companies, have capitulated to Trump's threats and are signaling their willingness to cooperate as if this were no longer the United States, but a sham democracy or even an outright authoritarian nation like Russia, where essentially the function of the media is to do whatever the maximum leader wants. That, of course, is Trump's fondest dream. And it's, as I say, deeply disturbing and also extremely disappointing to see not just Mark Zuckerberg, but Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post, one of the greatest newspapers in the United States and the world, whose reputation has been very seriously damaged by Mr. Bezos, the Los Angeles Times, and other traditional and online media outlets kowtowing to Donald Trump. It's, as I say, it's part of his overall assault on democracy, and much of it seems to be working.
Right. Zinabel, are the big tech companies hoping for a more favorable approach to antitrust regulation under Donald Trump's administration? Although, when you look at Trump's first term, the federal regulators, they began cracking down on Google and Facebook during his first term. Do they feel that his second administration may ease up on that enforcement? And is this also a way of submitting to the mandate that he has got?
That's a very interesting question that you asked right there, right? And to put it in more crass terms, is big tech sucking up to Donald Trump? And to think about that, I would say, I think the answer to that question, and I say that to myself, is absolutely yes, right? Because you see the changes that happened at Meta soon after, Donald Trump was declared, the winner of the U.S. president elections. A new Joel Kaplan, a new chief global affairs officer was brought into Meta, who had close ties with Donald Trump, who was a Republican, right? And then now Meta has decided to update its fact-checking policies and remove fact-checking in place and have in place community notes, right, instead of fact-checking. And Elon Musk was actually one of the first to do this with Twitter, wherein he removed fact-checking policies with more so community notes, right? And then shortly what followed thereafter was YouTube enforced similar policies, and now you see Meta making those changes. And this has also happened at a time when Dana White has joined the Meta board, who is a close ally of Donald Trump. So you see that Donald Trump is able to flex muscle. He, in some ways, is able to gain that control over the media, which seemingly he's always wanted, right? He's been overtly critical of the media, overtly critical of stories shared about him, in social media platforms. And while this is about freedom of speech and free speech, and Mark Zuckerberg announced that these new changes and policies have been brought on because they want to, at the core, preserve freedom of speech. A lot of it is also because of, President-elect Donald Trump and his policies and the power that he has over the news media at this point, and the power that he has overall, right? Being one of the most powerful presidents.
Absolutely. We are unfortunately running short of time. Thank you to the both of you for sharing your views. Will this removal of the fact-checking blur the line between fact and fiction over social media? Well, only time will tell. Time now for a very short break. More on the other side.